Flexibility will save you in research. It will save your research. So it's important that you understand now early when and how to be flexible, that you understand that you're not only allowed to be flexible, but you should be flexible in many decisions at different stages of your study. And if you're not, then you'll just keep encountering one barrier after another. And every week I talk to students who are stuck at different stages of the research, and usually the solution involves them understanding how to be flexible, what options they have in order to move forward. So in this video, I'll review 7 times when you should be flexible. I'll talk about the options and what this flexibility involves at different stages of your study. And to make sure that this video is not way too long, whenever there is more detail to be added, I'll just refer you to relevant videos on my channel. So let's get into it. Oh, and before we start, please consider liking the video as it helps others find me on YouTube and it helps my channel grow. So number 1, the stage when you have to be flexible is the very early stage of planning your study, and specifically I want to talk about the concept of a research gap here, because that's usually where it starts. And I remember as a student being pretty anxious about this idea of having to find a research gap, and I remember almost everybody in my class were anxious as well. So we were basically we were talking to each other and asking, if you found this gap already, can I have a little bit of that gap as well? So basically everybody was obsessed with that gap, and I blame again the way it's been presented to us, because whilst it is important to fill some sort of a gap or address some sort of a need for research, it's not always straightforward like that. It's not always that you have to fill literally a gap. So there is a topic that's never been touched and an idea that's never been investigated, and you're gonna get the idea. That will be extremely difficult, especially for a student with a little experience. So it's not that simple. A gap is it's more about a need for a study, so filling some sort of a need, addressing some sort of a need. So sometimes you may take an idea, for example, and you may apply it to different contexts, and that's enough to contribute to research. So for example, if we know about Spanish students' experiences in UK universities, but don't know about Polish students' experiences in UK universities, that's already a sign that perhaps there is a need for this study. I don't know if there is a need for this study, but you could probably find arguments saying that it's a different group, different cultural group, and therefore we also need to understand their needs. They may have different language skills, different cultural and historical background, and all sorts of things. So as you can see, I'm adopting somebody's idea, but I'm not necessarily coming up with something completely new. And like I said, this already means that we are addressing certain need for research. Sometimes you can literally take somebody's idea and just kind of replicate this study, and again, your study is a contribution because you're adding more evidence for these ideas, more evidence for the findings that this previous study or previous studies have generated. So just so you know, that's the first time when you can be really flexible with your ideas, and just don't worry too much about filling that gap. Now, number 2 is research methodology. Another thing I very often talk to my students about. So basically, people are petrified and they feel stuck because they have to choose research methodology. I do have a video, so have a look at the video. I think is here. Video about research methodologies. I outline the main methodologies, but I also explain that you don't always have to choose methodology, and that's a big misconception that you do. So people are stuck, and they literally, again, every week I talk to students who are trying to choose between, for example, 2 or more methodologies. They're not sure which one they should choose. What is even worse, sometimes they do it before even planning the study, which is also a big mistake. You should never start planning by thinking about what methodology you want to choose. You want to start planning your study and then look back and see, okay, I think maybe that fills this, or that describes this methodology. Maybe my study can be described with this methodology. As I often explain, methodologies are basically kind of templates for doing a study. Templates that include some certain beliefs, certain techniques for gathering the data, for sampling, for analysis. So it's a template. It's a template that may help you if it just happens that your study actually fits that methodology. So that's how it works. You may have a study that does not fit any methodology. You may have a study that draws from certain methodologies, more than one, by the way. So it may be influenced or inspired by certain methodology, or you may have a study that simply does not cannot be described as in terms of a certain methodology. So that's perfectly fine. And as you can see, you can be completely flexible here as well. Remember that your goal has to be always must be just to answer the research questions. I know it sounds obvious, but people forget. Your goal is to answer the research questions with any means possible, not to strictly stick to certain methodology to satisfy, for example, your supervisor. So that's the second time when you have to be flexible. And then after that, as you're moving into the stage of thinking about your research, your data collection, your research methods, that's another stage where you absolutely have to be flexible. And I often stress how impressed I am by many methods that I hear about from you guys when we have either lessons, private lessons, or I teach in universities. By the way, I'd love to encourage you to share your ideas in the comments under the video. Tell me about your ideas, your methodologies. Tell me if you've ever been creative and flexible with your methodologies, because I'm genuinely impressed when I talk to you guys at the way some of you mix methods for data collection and come up with new methods, because that's exactly what you have to do. Again, remember, your goal is to answer the research questions. For a second, just try to forget about all the pressure from the university, all the pressure from your supervisor, all the books where you've been reading about all these mysterious and complex methods. Just think, just be yourself and just think, what would I actually need to do to find answers to my research questions? And that's the starting point for thinking about data collection methods. So you can combine different methods. You can come up with new methods. So especially when it comes to like arts-based research, I've been hearing about all sorts of diaries or studies where people are asked to draw things and imagine things and act things out. Like I said, and all of that comes from you guys, from students. So you can be flexible with these methods. Then you can obviously combine different methods. Then you can have some new approaches to interviewing people. Again, of course, you do need to show some sort of awareness of the literature, knowledge of the literature, understanding of let's say universally accepted methods and standard procedures. But at the same time, nobody said that you cannot alter and adjust your methods. For example, the way you interview people based on your judgment, based on your understanding of the sample, of the people you are investigating. So by all means, you should be flexible, and again, do not be petrified and do not feel stuck by trying to just tick some boxes and meet some criteria that somebody developed in some book that you've read. And from there, as I explained in my most recent video, where, by the way, if you haven't watched it, I have this video where I just go through each stage of planning a study and I explain how you want to plan the study. So the next stage usually is at some point around this time you're thinking about the sample, so the participants, something I already mentioned in this video as well. So that's another time when you can be and you should be flexible in so many different ways. So firstly, how many participants do I investigate, do I research, do I interview, or whatever it is that you're doing in your study? So that's the first question. I do have a whole video about sample size, so feel free to watch it if you feel stuck about at this stage trying to justify your sample size. But that's not the only time in relation to that when you're flexible. So for example, you can be flexible in terms of demographics of the participants that you're involving in your study. And very often we have this conversation as well with my students. So they're asking, for example, do I have to have equal distribution of, let's say, males and females, teachers and students? And again, it's a very flexible concept, because whether you need that equal distribution will really depend on you. Again, you're fully in charge of that decision, and it will depend on what you're trying to achieve in your study. So if there is no need, for example, for comparisons like that, the main goal of your study is not comparing, for example, teachers and students' views, in which case you would probably ideally try to have, relatively balanced numbers of students and teachers, but otherwise you don't really have to have this kind of equal distribution. People very often worry about this way too much, because from there you can fall into a trap of trying to address and cover all possible characteristics. So I've worked, for example, with somebody doing some sort of a study of a psychologist, psychotherapist, or something like that, and eventually from wanting to include, for example, males and females, they went to trying to include males and females, but also from certain cities, and then from different cities, and so basically geographical distribution, and then also eventually not just gender but also sexual orientation. So and at some point, and I understand that you want to be inclusive, but at some point it's like I said, you're falling into a trap, because what else do you want to cover? You would if you continue this way, you'd have to do single people, married people, people with children, without children. So like I said, there are so many characteristics. It's not the goal of your research to cover all these characteristics, especially if you're doing qualitative research where you're not really trying to have this representative sample of the whole population. So unless you have a good reason, and again, it's entirely up to you. If you think, for example, if you're exploring migrants' views and you decide that I want to research, I want to interview migrants who have been in this country for at least 5 years, because I think that these people will have certain experiences. I think that when they just came over, they may have different views, different experiences. So I want to wait. I want to just include those who have been here for 5 years. That's entirely my decision and my judgment, and that's what you should be doing in your research as well. So don't try to just cover all these different populations and communities if there is no need for it. Don't forget to check out my ebook entitled Scholar's Guide to AI-Assisted Thematic Analysis, which is a useful resource for thematic analysis, whether you do plan to use AI or not. It contains plenty of useful advice, step-by-step instructions for thematic analysis, and a list of prompts that you can copy and paste into ChatGPT. Now, number 5, and this one is pretty long, but I'll just send you to different videos because I don't want this video to be extremely long, but data analysis is such an incredibly flexible stage of your study, and this relates to so many things. I have so many videos in which I explain how to analyze the data. So not only which approach you choose, so again, you can combine different approaches. People very often feel stuck in trying to just strictly follow a certain approach, for example, that is normally associated with the methodology that they chose. So again, as I said, you become a victim of your own choices. First, you were forced into choosing that methodology. Now you're being forced into following certain data analysis technique associated with that methodology. Again, you have to be flexible. Just do what you believe is right for this particular study. I'm not saying develop completely new ways of analyzing the data. I'm just saying you can be flexible in combining, for example, different approaches. If you're not doing a grounded theory study, you can still adopt and adjust and apply certain methods, for example, detailed ways of coding the data and developing themes from that data. So basically, you're doing what works for you at this given moment. You should be flexible in this. You should be flexible in what tools, for example, you're using. So again, do I use NVivo? Do I use Microsoft Word? Do I use ChatGPT? Do I do it manually? Again, you can do all of them. You can do one of them. It's entirely up to you. So very often I stress that on the one hand, I do like to use software, and I always argue that it does save you plenty of time. On the other hand, I always tell you, do what feels right for you. Don't do something that where you feel forced into it. Maybe you're completely useless with computers and technology. What's the point of trying to learn all these softwares now if maybe you just need to quickly analyze the data for a little small research project? So just do what you believe is right for you. Another thing is flexibility about terminology. I spent so much time trying to explain, do we talk about codes and themes and sub-themes? Do we talk about themes and categories in codes? Do we talk about level 1, level 2, level 3 codes? There are so many words for it as well, so many terminologies, sets of terminologies. Again, just stick to one and be consistent, and that's all that matters. Don't overthink it. I have a whole video as well about these terms, so won't be going into detail in this video. The final 2 points. This video is already pretty long. I hope that you're still there. So reporting. One thing is reporting, presenting the results of your thematic analysis. I have several videos of this, so again, I won't go into much detail, but you can be and you should be flexible in how you report, what kind of approach you choose. Do you, for example, develop your structure, your chapter, your results chapter by the research questions? So each section is one research question. Do you structure it by the different themes? So each section is one theme in your findings. Or maybe you structure it by the different groups. So one are the teachers, the other one are the students. Or do you structure it by the methods? So one will be your interview results, and then your focus group results, and so on and so forth. And again, the answer is it depends. It depends on you and how you want to present that story, that narrative, that story, the story of your findings, as I often say in my videos. As I said, I have plenty of videos about this, but one underlying message is that it really depends on you and your decision, because this is your story, and how you present it, how you pack and sell it to the reader is also entirely up to you. And even more flexible is the discussion of the results. This is actually something that's causing so much problems and so much trouble and so much stress to my students. Very often we talk about this. What do I discuss? How do I discuss the results? And again, what doesn't help is that this chapter is probably the most flexible, the least structured and fixed chapter of all chapters, which can be a good thing once you learn to appreciate it, but it can also be very stressful, like I said. So what do you discuss? There are hardly any rules. There are several rules for this chapter that I reviewed in my videos as well, such as that you have to refer to the literature, for example. You have to explain how you position the findings in that literature that you reviewed in the literature review chapter. Otherwise, you can be completely flexible. You can just go through each finding and compare it to that literature. You can develop a new model and maybe interpret the findings that you showed in that findings chapter. You can map these findings onto the existing model. You can discuss several existing models and ask questions about these models based on your findings. So again, it's up to you, because what you put in that chapter really depends on what you really have to say about your findings. And I know it's difficult, and I know, especially as a student, because again, you feel overwhelmed, you feel like you have to follow certain rules, but the rule is, this is your chapter, and in that chapter, it's your chance to really tell the reader what to make of all these things that you just show them in that results chapter. So you absolutely can be and should be flexible in that chapter as well. And this is it. I hope that you learned something new in this video. Please like the video if you did, share it with others, do comment under the video, let me know if you have any problems, ask questions. I always respond to your comments, 99% of them. If you feel that you require more detailed assistance, one-to-one support, feel free to look at my website, book an appointment, we can talk about your study. But I hope that you understood in this video that you should be flexible, and hopefully you feel at least a little bit more empowered to continue your study.